Hey everyone, I'm Alicia Esposito, and today I'm thrilled to have Gregg, who is a senior partner at McKinsey and co-leader of North America's marketing and sales practice. And we're going to have a really in-depth retail reset conversation. As most of you or all of you know, our goal for this virtual hub is really to bring together the best minds in retail to get their thoughts on some of the emerging trends, new data and insights, and most of all, provide some practical guidance to help you forge your path forward, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So Brian, thanks so much for taking the time out.
It's great to be here, Alicia. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, no, I mainly wanted to take some time to chat with you because a few weeks back now, maybe a month or so, we did a early assessment, early coverage of some of the research that McKinsey has been doing to track shifting consumer behaviors, shifting consumer sentiment across 42 countries, which is expansive, really detailed and granular, which I, as a writer and content person, appreciate. But wanted to reconnect with you largely because in the US, obviously, we're dealing with reopenings at this point and still seeing some shifting consumer sentiment. So to start off our conversation, would love for that to kind of be the groundwork or the foundation for our conversation today. What are you seeing for the US specifically in terms of consumer sentiment? How is everyone feeling with these reopenings happening now?
Well, thanks, Alicia, for the great question. I mean, as you said, we've been doing this weekly pulse survey with US consumers ever since COVID-19 really began. Across now 42 markets, so it's very interesting to compare and contrast. But to answer your question, we're seeing really a tale of two stories emerge. Right? On one hand, it's quite easy to see a fairly pessimistic view of a bunch of headwinds that are hitting the consumer right now. About 50% of consumers report to us expecting to reduce their overall household spending in the next couple months. At the same time, we're seeing that in the month of April, we hit an all-time low for retail shopping, negative 16% in April, the lowest on record since we started recording that data over 30 years ago. And then the third, maybe most interesting or surprising point, at least to us as we were doing the research, we found that over 20% of consumers reporting changing the brand or the retailer where they're shopping for certain categories. And so you put that all together and you say, well, that doesn't sound great, right? That's sort of a pessimistic view. I think the other side of the story, though, here is that this is a real opportunity for many retailers. And you open saying, can we get some tactical ideas going about what the potential here is? We're quite optimistic about the opportunity in that the Gameboard is resetting, right? The digital surge that we just observed, that we just went through in the last 90 days is incredible. Just to put it in sort of proportion here, it took us about 10 years in the US, the last decade, in fact, to achieve about 11 points of digital penetration in retail. We accomplished that again in the last 90 days. So 10 years in 90 days, that kind of a human behavioral shift in that short period of time is a massive change, but it says the disruption for a Gameboard reset or a leaderboard reset, to be even more specific, is real, right? So the leaders of each category, I think the space and the opportunity to redefine who you are as a brand or a retailer and to really win is playing on open field. It's a greenfield Gameboard. The other thing we're seeing is that on the whole, and especially as we look at past recessions, we know that retailers who invest in the customer experience, whether that be digital, physical, omni, actually come out the other end winning. In fact, to the tune of 3 times the total shareholder return that those who don't invest achieve. So for those reasons, we're optimistic. We say this is an opportunity to reset the Gameboard. It really, truly is. And harnessing your digital investments, how you think about the new consumer mindset, is an opportunity to white sheet, clean sheet, use your favorite term, who's going to be winning at the end of this crisis.
Yeah, some really great points there, Brian. I think we're going to dig into all of them as we peel back the onion, so to speak. But before we get into the possibilities, the opportunities, all of the great optimist stuff that I like to call out, I do want to get into some of the negative side a little bit, specifically the shock to loyalty, which I feel like loyalty in retail has always been a hot topic, has always been a struggle for certain retailers, especially those that are more mass merchants, kind of fall in the middle, don't necessarily have, unique attributes that, drive that loyalty. So they're trying to figure out how do we create that experience to drive that engagement and loyalty in the long term. So definitely an ongoing critical topic for a lot of business executives. So let's dig into that shock to loyalty. What's driving it? Because I think that could be a driver for internal conversations as far as like priorities go. So would love your take on what's happening in the loyalty space specifically.
So this isn't just about a one-time hiccup, right? And then we're back to normal. This is about an ongoing reset. And so I think, a lot of this is driven by the conditions that consumers are forced with, right? Having to purchase digitally, e-commerce, click and collect, meaning curbside, or buy online and picking up in store. These are all phenomenons that many consumers, depending on the cohort they're in, haven't really had to do before or haven't done that much of. And so when you put all of that together, you're essentially redefining convenience for the consumer. Before it used to be, okay, which grocery store was closest to my house and carry the products I wanted. Done. Now, with the ability, with shelter and home mandates, that sort of 3-mile, 3-block radius decision framework is gone. And so consumers, in fact, we found 15% of consumers reporting switching their grocery store, which is unheard of in the world of grocery, where a stream of loyalty, if there is ever any category in retail, it's in grocery. So it just shows you that customer journeys are changing, where they start and where they end them, and then their willingness to really try different experiences is at a all-time high. And then the question will be, of course, and we can get into this, who's going to win from that? Who can get the new consumer to stick with them, and who's going to lose them and revert back to where the leaderboard was before?
Yeah, it's very interesting how the qualifiers have changed. I've even noticed in my own behaviors, right? Depending on the day and the situation, what I need, there are different boxes I need to check to determine where I need to go, right? Even if, to your point around availability, it's like, oh, last time I went there, they didn't have it, and then I don't have to go somewhere else. So I think there's that notion of, there are going to be people, even though, we're seeing a lot of folks eager to go back to stores just to feel that sense of normalcy, normal, whatever that means today. So there's this notion of, there are going to be some people that want to limit the number of trips they take, the amount of time they spend in the store. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you kind of referenced this earlier, that there are some people that are going to be spending less altogether. So I want to hit on those consumers too, because we are navigating, the unemployment factor, right? Or people changing employment. So that's going to be impacting how they spend as well. So, talk to us about what kind of impact that will have, what categories have been hit hardest, and really, is there like a timeline for how you expect this to have a long tail effect on the industry? I'm sure some unanswered questions there, but I'm sure a lot of the folks watching now would need to want to understand how are my consumers being hit in this area?
You're right, Alicia, and you said it, right? This is a category by category game right now. And so as we sort of look at what's happening, and this is not just a survey pulse-based what consumers are saying, we're actually looking at credit card data and some of the e-commerce data that McKinsey has. And what we're finding is essentially there's 3 categories that have been strong from the beginning of COVID, not surprisingly, right? Groceries, household supplies, and at-home entertainment. Those 3 continue. They started strong. They remain strong. And you can imagine that going through the course of 2020 to be the case. But as you start to then peel the onion back on the other categories, there is a bit of a hierarchy here, right? Of less and less essential is basically what's driving it, to the point where you get to truly discretionary purchases that can be either pushed out or frankly completely not taken at all. And one other data point that's, I guess, important and informative here is this: we look back at the recession that we last went through in the US, 2007, 8, 9. what we found is for some of the most discretionary items and discretionary categories, so think of fashion, apparel, beauty, et cetera, we didn't get to the entire regain of demand that we had pre-recession for about 5 or 6 quarters. And remember that recession back then, at least as projections look to be right now, isn't anywhere close to the recession we're likely to have here, given the unemployment rates we're already seeing. Okay. And so if you put that light on it, you could say, well, there is a world where some of these categories will come back on faster than others. But we could be looking at a world where 2022, 2023, it may take us a year, 2 or 3 to actually regain the kind of demand we were seeing in 2019 for some of these very discretionary categories.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's a fair point. And, we've been having a lot of conversations with consumer behavioralists, analysts, even just, more consultant types. And it's been interesting to see the variance in opinions around, what this recovery, graph, so to speak, is going to look like. People are like, oh, is it going to be more of a V shape? Is it going to be more of like a slow curve? The more research that comes out, it definitely seems like it's going to be that kind of slow and steady, sort of shift over time, because the consumer is being hit with not just the realities of figuring out where to go to stores and I don't want to shop online for X product, but also the the household issues that are surrounding their buying decisions, right? So so many layers to that conversation. And I think the one piece that I do want to dig into next is the long-term impact of this situation on e-com or digital, because we've been keeping a close eye on the opportunities for brands, the ones that have kind of been innovating, especially in those more discretionary categories like apparel, cosmetics, doing things like live streaming or, more chat-based service. So it's been an interesting pivot. So I guess my question for you is this digital surge, is this kind of like the new reality? Are we going to continue to see this kind of increase over time? And what is the ultimate bottom line impact for retailers? What does this mean for them from a long-term perspective?
Again, a great question, Alicia, and not that we have the full crystal ball, but I think we do know a few things, right? I think number one, we do know digital is not going to completely disappear. What this last 90-day period has taught many U.S. consumers is that there is a different, but often better, at least more convenient, defined as a consumer would define it, way to shop. And so let's not forget that what this period has done is there are many generations or cohorts of consumers who never really did shop digitally for one reason or the other, and now they've been forced to, and they're learning the benefits of it. So we do believe some of that will stick in some way, shape, or form. I think the second thought is that this is not going to be the same answer for every category. Again, back to this category by category answer. Think about grocery. We saw some grocers go from what was about 1.5–2% digital penetration before the virus to close to 8 to 10%. That kind of a jump and that small of a window is unprecedented, right? And so now, will all of that remain? Probably not to the same exact peak. We could probably guess, but will it fall all the way back to 1.5%? Probably not either. And so being able to be ready to understand this new world happened quickly, and grocery, for one, being prepared for what a click and collect world needs to look like, much like what we already have seen in many places in Europe, but the US sort of accelerating there because of what COVID-19 did and forced upon many of the households that were buying these things. On the other hand, there are categories where touch and feel, in-person advice, often we hear people report that knowing exactly I could get it tomorrow or today if I needed it, those kinds of consumer-based needs aren't going away, right? They're going to remain. And as we reopen as an economy and as physical retail reopens, those needs states are going to also be a big part of it. So I don't think we're sitting here saying the digital surge we just witnessed and making up 10 years literally in 3 months is something we'd expect to be completely sticky, 100% across all categories. But I think no matter what, it's a good idea, to your last question, how do retailers prepare for this? We do have to realize that we are now in a world where digital first, digital led, and often digitally transacted is just a reality across everything.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting shift because I'm noticing that it's changing the way consumers think about the buying process, and also retail executives too. Like as they're thinking through the experience, it's almost like with a digital eye or a digital lens at this point, because I'm glad you brought up the different demographics, because for grocery especially, you know, seeing people you know, start to test online ordering, the surge. I mean, I couldn't get a grocery delivery time slot, and I tried weeks in advance. So it'll be interesting to see in what categories this digital influence continues, and also, you know, how retailers, and say again, going back to apparel, cosmetics, how they may look at digital as a way to add that extra layer of ease and safety to the experience. Like what kind of technologies can they use to bring the magic of touch and feel to digital, or you know, what do they need to rethink from an in-store experience standpoint? Because a lot of questions around like how much inventory should we be keeping on the floor now, how can we improve the fitting room experience? I feel like there's so many layers you know, to those strategic conversations. Now that we know, okay, that this digital layer, we already knew about the digital influence, but I feel like this is going to be very much sustained, and it'll help, I think, drive a lot of those internal conversations moving forward. So I think that'll be really interesting to keep tabs on.
No question. In fact, you're right that if anything has happened as retailers have begun to reopen, just the line of surprises, right? Things that just weren't contemplated. I was with a management team last week where they had just reopened part of their chain, their physical retail chain. And what they hadn't fully appreciated in all the models and simulations and preparation was that, you know, given the square footage of the store, the amount of people consumers they could actually let in was going to be reduced, obviously. But what that created was a line out the door in a way they had not ever had before, nor had they thought through that sort of element. And so now you have consumers waiting outside, and the question becomes, okay, well, what do we do with that line? In some ways, that's latent demand. Should we have a store associate out there asking ahead of time what they're looking for? Should we be using that opportunity to download our loyalty app? Well, the consumer, like these things weren't contemplated, and that's just one small example of the whole host of things. And basically, the playbook's being rewritten, right? As consumers rewire their shopping journeys, retailers are rewiring their entire playbook for physical retail, to your point, to be contactless, to be safe, hygiene being at a premium, but also then realizing how do we actually, in this new journey, this new shopping journey where contactless rules, what's the ways in which we invest and win in that world? That's a real question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you talked about people waiting in line, because that is a key driver for me. Like, I know if I'm driving past the grocery store and I see a line, I'm like, oh, heck no, I'm going to keep going. I'll figure out another time and day to go back. But that is an opportunity, because if you know up front, like, oh, this retailer is going to provide X service, or while you're waiting, let's do Y. Like, help us test out a new product, or like let us, you know, do something more consultative to allow you, like when you do get through the door, like maybe you discover something new, or, you know, maybe you feel more informed to make the best decisions. Hearing similar things around curbside, the curbside pickup experience as well. How do you add a little surprise and delight to that experience? I know a lot of people are saying like focus on the fundamentals first, but I still think there's a way for, you know, brands and retailers to shine, even through those more safety and utility driven experiences. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Couldn't agree more. And I think even your point around the fundamentals, what constitutes fundamental is changing, right? Mm-hmm. So I've even seen some of these new playbooks that are coming out, right, of how we're going to make sure everybody's got PPE and making sure everybody's got the right contactless script so that frontline associates can most be helpful without ever having to be more than 6 feet apart. These are tricky things. They weren't in the playbooks 90 days ago, right? Obviously. But then at the same time, consumers are coming in with a whole new set of concerns. And so
Yeah.
the fact that both sides are changing so fundamentally, to use your word, at the same time, does create an opportunity for new leaders to come out and actually lead us to the new normal.
Yeah. So with that, let's dig into those areas of opportunity, because as anyone can tell just by watching this conversation, let alone all the content that we've been producing, a lot of things kind of up in the air right now, and also a lot of new trends emerging at the same time. So this is a lot for even seasoned execs, savviest execs to kind of wrap their heads around and figure out what's our plan of attack. What do we focus on in the short term? What's our long-term game plan, especially looking at it through the context of, okay, this may be 2 to 3 years that we're going to be navigating all of these factors. So let's bring back that term you used, resetting the game board or the leaderboard, which I love. How can companies reset that game board or leaderboard, find new opportunities, and come out stronger through all of this? I mean, I'm sure there's no silver bullet, but if there are any strategic questions to ask or action items, I think that would be a great way to close our conversation today.
Excellent. Let's give it a shot. And I think what we've at McKinsey have tried to do is looking across all markets, recognizing some markets are further ahead than others, trying to in aggregate what we are seeing as some of the leading management teams, some of the leading retailers. What are they doing, and sort of consolidate that into 4 or 5 hallmarks, if you will, of attributes or characteristics of leading companies that we think will emerge stronger. So maybe we can use that as the basis to answer your question. The five hallmarks that sort of are popping out right now. Number one is this idea of multi-speed management. And what we mean by that is there are a lot of companies that are easily putting their hands all towards how do I get through the crisis, the here and the now, the hourly grind. And I was just in an executive forum last week with Asian executives who were saying if there was one regret, there's one thing they could go back and do differently, it would have been the allocation of time they put towards the here and the now, the hourly grind, and the actual recovery, and frankly, the reimagination at the other end. So I think it's a good instruction for all of us, particularly in the US, who are a little behind the Asian markets in this, of thinking about how do we actually operate at multiple speeds and ensuring we have dedicated leadership capacity, not only on the here and the now crisis management, not only just the recovery as physical retail chains are opening, but also on the reimagine. What is this next normal? It's not just a new normal, it's a next normal. We're literally jumping to a place. We're not going to go back to pre-COVID. It's going to look different. How do we operate there, right? So that's number one, and it's probably the most important of all as we've looked across this. Number two is this idea of this reimagination piece, of truly taking the time to reimagine what your business model, your business value addition looks like. And there are some examples of companies who have started already to take a hard look at that. Number three, we're calling granularity. Granularity for a long time has been an important piece of how you do analytics and how you think about managing. But one thing we're seeing to be true across the US is volatility and unevenness day to day in terms of demand spikes, demand lags, category by category, zip code by zip code. The ability to actually be very granular in how you're thinking about getting out the other side of this is a super important hallmark that we think will dictate leaders. A fourth hallmark is what we're calling virtual agility. Agility, of course, is not a new playbook either. But the idea of doing it in a virtual mode, in a virtual manner, is quite new. And so the virtual pieces of making sure you not only have the granularity, but you also have the agility to actually act on that granularity, more important than ever. And then maybe fifth and finally, and then would welcome any thoughts, Alicia, is this idea of self-banked growth, meaning we're the first to recognize this is a period of cash management, liquidity, concerns, et cetera. Being able to actually completely clean sheet the way your cost infrastructure works so that you can free up capacity to invest in growth, meaning not having to borrow, not having to actually go to potentially the CFO to ask for more funding beyond what you've already asked for, but to self-bank it, we think is a critical muscle, a muscle that needs to be not only part of the recovery, but part of the ongoing trend here.
Yeah, I think a lot of really great points, Brian. And I think the points around virtual agility, what that looks like will be an interesting, best practice or trend to track because, we saw some retailers really rise to the occasion in light of, shutdowns, offering curbside, really standing up these experiences very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think if anything, and I've said this in a few conversations, it showed that this type of rapid change or transformation is possible. We just needed the right force to, drive or push executive leaders to make those bets because they really didn't have an option. So I think to close out our conversation, Brian, I'd love your thoughts on, where you think this future of innovation and transformation are going. Are we going to see people, more eager and willing to take those bets, to make those rapid changes? Or am I just being a brutal optimist right now and I'm setting myself up for disappointment? Because so many years of the legacy red tape and complexity and, oh, let's do this, let's innovate. And then it just kind of takes 5 steps back. What's your take? Is that virtual agility component really going to be an accelerator, a driver for innovation moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you what, maybe one interesting observation to share as an answer to that is it's really hard to run a 17-person Zoom call.
Yes.
Whereas, in the physical world, we all sort of waited for the 17-person meeting to finally make decisions. And so what I'm finding interesting is, and I just had a CEO tell me this last week as well from a very large iconic retailer say, this was the Band-Aid ripped off that we needed. Right? This is the ultimate clean sheet of the human experiment of how do we get to actually from a clean sheet of paper, rewire and rewrite the way we work. And so I'm finding a lot of heads of talent, heads of HR, CEOs, folks who really obsess about culture, recognizing this is a moment to not only innovate the business, but innovate the culture, the way we work, the way decisions get made. And to your point, many organizations have been forced into a speed that is agile, a newsroom like cadence where daily or even hourly decisions that were super important had to be made. And by the way, we didn't have time for 20 pages of PowerPoint to be created. We had to make the call now. This has taught a lot of companies that this is possible. And I think a lot of management teams are enjoying this and saying, how do we hold on to this? When we do return into more of a physical work from the office type of situation, or at least a hybrid, how do we hold on to that? How do we make sure the decision, the speed, and the velocity continues? And I do think you're right to be optimistic. I'm optimistic about what this means for American retail. I think we can stand out and use this as a chance to step change the experience for consumers. And I'm quite optimistic about what the future of retail really will demonstrate as we go forward.
That's great, Brian. Good. Glad to hear I'm not alone in that. So we'll have to do a circle back, a follow-up after a few months pass, because I think, as stores continue to reopen, as we start to see more retailers make some moves, of course, we'll see some negative headlines or downer news, as we start to see some businesses shake out or attempt to recover. But it'll be fascinating to see how brands and retailers really hold on to, that opportunity, as you said, which I think is a great way to frame it. So, Brian, thank you again so much for taking the time out. If people want to learn more about the research you guys do, the work that you're doing, where should they go? Is it just McKinsey.com?
McKinsey.com.
There we go.
Any of the questions we came up today, just go and you can go to our COVID page, which has a lot of the insights we shared today. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Thanks so much for taking the time, talking shop with me. And then if anyone's interested in diving deeper into all the different, countries as well, I know McKinsey.com, breaks down all of those trends and takeaways. So very valuable resource. Thanks to you and the team again for providing such great insight to the industry.
Thank you, Alicia. Have a great one.
You too. And thanks everyone out there for watching. Take care.